From Shadows to Light, the story of Gandhi's fight for freedom. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Feared Shadows. Mohandas. Karamchand. Gandhi was a small, thin boy with wide, nervous eyes. He grew up in a busy house in Porbandar, a seaside town in India. His father, Karamchand, was a strict man who worked for the local government. His mother, Putlibai, was kind but firm, always praying or helping the poor. Mohandas was the youngest of 4 children, and though his family loved him, he often felt alone. He hated the dark. At night, when the oil lamps burned low, shadows stretched across his bedroom walls like long, twisting arms. Mohandas would bury himself under his blanket, squeezing his eyes shut until morning. "Why am I so afraid?" he whispered to himself. His older brother Laxmidas teased him. Only babies fear shadows, but Mohandas couldn't help it. One day, something happened that changed him forever. Laxmidas owned a tiny gold trinket, a gift from their father. Mohandas had always admired it. One afternoon, while his brother was out, he crept into Laxmidas's room. The trinket sat on the desk, glittering in the sunlight. Mohandas's hands shook as he picked it up. "No one will know," he told himself, slipping it into his pocket. But guilt followed him like a shadow. That night, he couldn't eat. His mother's spicy lentils tasted like dust. When Laxmidas stormed into the room, shouting about the stolen trinket, Mohandas's heart pounded. He waited until the house was quiet, then tiptoed to his father's study. "Father, I took it," he confessed, tears dripping onto the floor. Karamchand's face hardened. For a terrible moment, Mohandas thought he would yell, but then his father's eyes softened. He pulled Mohandas into a hug. "Truth cuts like a knife, my son," he said quietly. "It hurts, but it cleans the wound." Mohandas didn't fully understand, but he never forgot those words. His mother taught him other lessons. Putlibai believed in simplicity. She wore plain cotton saris, ate only simple meals, and fasted often. One day, Mohandas spilled a bowl of rice. "Leave it," the servant said. "We have more." Putlibai shook her head. She knelt and gathered every grain. "Food is a gift," she told Mohandas. "Waste nothing." Later, she gave the rice to a hungry old man who came to their door. "Why do you fast, mother?" Mohandas asked during a religious holiday as she went without food for the 3rd day. "Fasting makes our bodies weak, but our spirits strong," she replied. "It reminds us to think of others, not ourselves." Mohandas tried to copy her. He gave his sweets to the children of the servants and saved coins for beggars. But fear still followed him, fear of the dark, fear of speaking in front of others, fear of being laughed at. One stormy night, the wind blew out all the lamps in the house. Mohandas sat frozen in the blackness, clutching his blanket. Then he heard his mother's voice. "Mohandas, light the lamp." I can't see the matches," he cried. "Feel for them," she said calmly. His hands trembled as he fumbled on the table. Finally, he struck a match. The tiny flame pushed back the darkness. "See?" Putlibai smiled. "One small light can conquer the biggest shadows. Truth is like that, Mohandas. It will always guide you." He stared at the flickering flame. For the first time, he wondered if courage wasn't about being fearless, but about finding a light, even in the dark. Chapter 2. Letters from London. The ship groaned as it rocked on the dark, icy waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Mohandas Gandhi, now 19 years old, clutched the railing, his knuckles white. He had never seen so much water. Back in Porbandar, the sea was warm and green. But here it was a monster, roaring and slapping the sides of the boat. "What have I done?" he thought. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Promise me, Mohandas. No meat, no wine. Stay true to yourself." London was nothing like India. The streets were choked with fog, and everyone walked fast, their faces hidden under black hats. Mohandas wore a stiff English suit that scratched his neck. He hated it, but his brother had said, "You must look modern." At the university, students laughed at his accent. "Say tea again," they teased. Mohandas mumbled, "Tia!" and their laughter followed him down the hall. At night, he wrote letters to Kasturba, his wife, back in India. "Dear Ba, London is cold and the food tastes like paper. I miss your lentil soup. The English eat meat every day, even for breakfast. I tried to cook lentils on a small stove, but the smoke set off the alarm. The landlady shouted at me. I am so alone." He never sent the letters. One gray afternoon, Mohandas wandered into a small bookstore. A sign in the window read, "Vegetarian Society meeting tonight. All welcome." His heart leaped. Vegetarian, the word felt like home. The meeting was in a dusty room above the shop. A dozen people sat on wooden chairs, arguing about animal rights and peace. Mohandas hid in the back, but a woman with fiery red hair and a long green dress turned to him. "You're new," she said. Her name was Clara, and she was a suffragette fighting for women's right to vote. "Why do you care about vegetables?" she asked, grinning. "Ahimsa," he said quietly. "Non-hurting. My mother taught me." Clara nodded. "We're not so different. I fight for people. You fight for animals. Both are about freedom." Mohandas began attending meetings every week. Clara gave him books. The Kingdom of God is Within You by Tolstoy, the Bhagavad Gita, and pamphlets about equality. He read them by candlelight, underlining words like truth and soul. "Dear Ba, I met a woman who says women deserve the same rights as men. Can you imagine? In India, they would call her mad. But here, people listen. I think Mother would like her." Winter came, and the cold bit through Mohandas's thin coat. He saved money by walking everywhere, even when snow soaked his leather shoes. One evening, Clara invited him to a dinner party. "Wear something nice," she said. The room was full of laughter and the clink of wine glasses. Mohandas stood frozen by the door. He didn't know how to use a fork or make small talk. A man in a velvet jacket sneered, "Do they even have forks in India?" Mohandas's face burned. We use our hands," he stammered. Clara swooped in, linking her arm with his. "Eating with hands is civilized," she declared. "It means you trust your food." Later, she handed him a plate of roasted vegetables. "Don't let them make you small," she whispered. One night, Mohandas found a tiny leather-bound Bhagavad Gita in a second-hand shop. He carried it everywhere, tracing the Sanskrit words with his finger. "The soul is neither born nor dies," he read. "Weapons cannot cut it, fire cannot burn it. Dear Ba, I think I understand Father's lesson now. Truth is like the soul. It cannot be destroyed, not by shadows, not by bullies, not even by an ocean." Years passed. Mohandas passed his law exams, but still felt like an outsider. On his last day in London, Clara gave him a notebook. "Write your truth," she said, "and come back someday." On the ship home, Mohandas tore his old letters to Kasturba into pieces, scattering them into the sea. He wasn't the boy who feared shadows anymore. Chapter 3. The Train to Pretoria. The South African sun burned white-hot in the sky as Mohandas Gandhi stepped off the ship in Durban. It was 1893, and he had taken a job as a lawyer for an Indian trading company. The air smelled of salt and sweat, and the docks buzzed with workers shouting in Zulu, English, and Hindi. Mohandas adjusted his stiff European suit, already missing the light cotton clothes of India. "You'll stay in the Indian quarter," said Abdullah, the man who hired him. He pointed to a row of cramped wooden houses. "Europeans live there." He nodded toward a hill dotted with grand homes and gardens. Mohandas frowned, but said nothing. Weeks later, he boarded a train to Pretoria for a court case. He had a first-class ticket, bought with his own money. The train rattled through dry, golden plains. Mohandas stared out the window, thinking of Kasturba's latest letter. She was pregnant with their second child, and her words were short and cold. "You left us. Again." A tall white conductor stormed into his compartment. "You can't sit here," he barked. "But I have a first-class ticket," Mohandas said, holding it up. The conductor spat on the floor. "Coolies don't sit with whites. Move to the luggage car." Mohandas's hands trembled. "I am a lawyer. I demand—" The conductor grabbed his arm, yanking him into the aisle. Passengers stared as Mohandas stumbled, his glasses slipping off his face. He scrambled to pick them up, but the conductor kicked them away. "Now, Indian!" Humiliated, Mohandas sat on his suitcase in the filthy luggage car, surrounded by boxes and chickens. The air reeked of manure. "Is this what I am?" he thought. "Less than a chicken?" That night, in a cheap Pretoria hotel, Mohandas couldn't sleep. He wrote to Kasturba, his pen shaking, "Dear Ba, today I learned that in South Africa even a rat has more dignity than a brown man. But I will not run back to India. I will fight. I do not know how yet." He folded the letter, but didn't send it. The next morning, he met a Zulu cleaner named Samuel in the hotel hallway. Samuel was tall, with scars on his arms and a quiet smile. He mopped floors from dawn to dusk. "Why do you work here?" Mohandas asked. Samuel leaned on his mop. "Same reason you wear that suit. To survive." They became unlikely friends. Samuel taught Mohandas phrases in Zulu and Xhosa. Mohandas taught him to read English. One evening, Samuel showed him a newspaper article about a new law. All Indians must carry a registration card and pay a heavy tax. "They want to crush us," Samuel said. Mohandas stared at the paper. "Then we will bend," he said slowly, "but not break." Mohandas called a meeting for Indian workers in a cramped church hall. Only a dozen men came, their faces tired and suspicious. "We cannot accept these laws," Mohandas said. "We will protest. Peacefully." A man laughed. "And if they beat us? Shoot us?" "Then we will show them our courage," Mohandas said. "But we will not fight back." The men grumbled. But when the government demanded their fingerprints like criminals, Mohandas led them to the registration office. They stood silently outside, holding signs. Unfair laws, unfair rule. Police arrived, swinging batons. "Go home, coolies." Mohandas stepped forward. "Arrest me first." They did. Months later, Kasturba arrived in South Africa with her 2 sons. She glared at Mohandas in their tiny rented room. "You promised this job would last a year. Now you're in jail. What kind of father are you?" "Bah, this is bigger than us." She threw a pot of lentils onto the stove. "Your big ideas won't feed your children." Mohandas touched her shoulder. "I need your help." She shook him off, but that night he heard her crying in the dark. One evening, Samuel rushed to Mohandas's door. "They burned an Indian store. The owner is hurt." Mohandas ran through the smoky streets. The store was ashes. The owner's face blackened. "Why?" Mohandas asked. "He refused to leave his land," Samuel said. Mohandas knelt in the dirt. "This is not freedom," he thought. "This is fear." He stood, ash clinging to his suit. "We will build again and again until they see we cannot be erased." Chapter 4. The Salt of the Earth. The Indian sun beat down on the dusty village of Sabarmati, where Mohandas Gandhi sat cross-legged on the floor of his ashram. It was 1930, and the air buzzed with tension. Outside, hundreds of people, farmers, students, mothers with babies on their hips, crowded around the gates, waiting for his words. Britain's salt tax had pushed the poor to starvation, and Gandhi had promised action. Kasturba knelt beside him, grinding wheat into flour. "You're stirring a hornet's nest, Bapu," she said, using the affectionate name Father the people had given him. "The British won't let this go." Gandhi smiled faintly. "A hornet's nest must be stirred, Ba, even if it stings." For weeks, he had written letters to the British government demanding they end the salt tax. They ignored him. Now he would march 240 miles to the sea to make salt himself, a bold act of defiance. At dawn, Gandhi stood at the front of the crowd, leaning on a bamboo stick. He wore a simple white dhoti and round wire glasses. Behind him stood 78 followers, men and women of all ages, their feet wrapped in cloth. Kasturba had refused to stay behind. "If you drown in the ocean, someone must pull you out," she said, tying her sari tighter. The walk was slow and grueling. They passed through villages where farmers wept as they described British soldiers burning their crops. Children ran alongside the marchers, offering coconut water and flowers. At night, Gandhi spun cotton on his portable charkha, spinning wheel, while Kasturba bandaged blistered feet. "Why do we spin?" a young boy asked one evening. "Because every thread is a promise," Gandhi said. "A promise to free ourselves from British cloth. On the 20th day, the sea appeared, a glittering line on the horizon. The crowd swelled to thousands. Journalists from America and Europe followed, snapping photos. Gandhi waded into the water, his dhoti soaked, and scooped up a handful of wet sand. "With this salt we declare our independence," he shouted. The crowd erupted. People boiled seawater in pots, scraping out tiny crystals of illegal salt. Kasturba handed packets to villagers. "Take it. It's yours by right." But the British struck back. Police raided villages, smashing salt pots and beating anyone who resisted. Gandhi was arrested at midnight, dragged from his cot while Kasturba screamed, "Cowards! He's an old man." News of his arrest spread like wildfire. All over India, people began making salt. In the coastal city of Dharasana, a group of protesters planned to occupy a British salt factory. Gandhi, still in jail, sent a message. "Do not fight. Let them see your courage." Kasturba led the march this time. Beside her walked Leela, a 16-year-old girl whose brother had been jailed for owning salt. "What if they shoot us?" Leela asked, her voice trembling. "Then we die with clean hands," Kasturba said. At the factory gates, British soldiers stood with steel-tipped lathis, clubs. The protesters advanced, singing an old freedom song. The first blow cracked a man's skull. He fell silently. The next shattered a woman's arm. Still the crowd pressed forward, offering no resistance. Leela stepped forward, a jar of homemade salt in her hands. A soldier raised his lathi. "Stop!" Kasturba shouted, but the club came down. Leela crumpled, the jar smashing against the ground. Kasturba knelt, scooping salt and blood into her palm. "Look!" she cried to the journalists. "This is the price of freedom." Gandhi was released weeks later, his body frail, but his spirit unbroken. The world had seen the violence of the British Raj. Newspapers called the protest a miracle of bravery. That night, Leela's mother came to Gandhi's hut. She placed a cracked jar in his hands, the one Leela had carried. Inside were salt crystals, pink, with dried blood. "She wanted you to have this," the woman whispered. Gandhi held the jar to his heart. "This salt is worth more than gold. It is the earth and blood of India." Chapter 5. The Last Fast. The streets of Calcutta exploded with noise on August 15, 1947. Fireworks painted the sky, and crowds danced, shouting, "Jai Hind! Long live India!" But Mohandas Gandhi sat alone in a small, dim room, his head bowed. India was free at last, but his heart felt heavy as stone. The country had been torn in two, India for Hindus, Pakistan for Muslims. He had pleaded for unity, but no one listened. Now, trains packed with refugees fled both sides of the border, and stories of violence filled the air like smoke. "Bapu, come celebrate," a young boy begged, tugging Gandhi's dhoti. Gandhi shook his head. "True freedom is not in flags or fireworks, beta. It is here," he said, touching the boy's chest. Weeks later, the violence grew worse. Mobs burned homes, killed families, and left streets littered with broken bodies. In Delhi, Gandhi's friend, Pyarelal, rushed to him with news. A Muslim orphanage was attacked. 6 children, gone. Gandhi closed his eyes. Bring me a cot. I will not eat until the fighting stops. But you're 78, Pyarala cried. You'll die. Then I die, Gandhi said quietly. The world watched as Gandhi's fast began. Day by day, his body weakened. His speeches became whispers. Leaders from both India and Pakistan crowded into his room, begging him to eat. Stop the riots first, he rasped. In the streets, something shifted. A Hindu man rescued a Muslim neighbor from a mob. A Muslim woman hid a Hindu child in her home. Slowly, the killing slowed. On the fifth day, a group of rioters came to Gandhi's door. They dropped their knives and swords at his feet. We are ashamed, their leader said. We will protect our brothers Hindu and Muslim. Gandhi nodded, too weak to smile. Kasturba, though long gone, would have been proud. But not everyone forgave. Nathuram Godse, a man with anger in his eyes, blamed Gandhi for favoring Muslims. He bought a pistol and practiced shooting in the woods. On January 30th, 1948, Gandhi walked through a garden in Delhi, leaning on his grandnieces. The evening air was cool, and he smiled at the crowd. Let us pray for peace, he said. Godse pushed forward. Namaste, Bapu, he said, folding his hands. Then he fired 3 times. Gandhi fell, his glasses slipping off. His last breath was a whisper. Hey Ram, oh God. Millions mourned. His body was carried through the streets on a wooden cart covered in flowers. Farmers, soldiers, and children wept as they threw rice and petals onto his shroud. At his funeral, Prime Minister Nehru said, "The light has gone out of our lives, but the flame he lit will never die." Epilogue. Years later, a girl named Annika sat in a Delhi library, flipping through an old book. A photo fell out. Gandhi spinning thread, his smile gentle. On the back, someone had written, "Truth never dies." Annika tucked the photo into her bag. That afternoon, she joined a protest for clean water, her sign painted with Gandhi's words, "Be the change."